Here we are at last, at the final part of our full recap of the Resident Evil series, where we're going to be covering the events of its last new release, Resident Evil 8 Village, and its DLC Shadow of Rose, which together conclude the story of the Winters family. Now, before we begin, this video is based on our understanding of Resident Evil 8 Village's story and lore, and reflects our interpretation of its events as a refresher before Resident Evil Requiem. As always, we recommend that you make your own informed call by looking into the game yourself and ensuring that it matches your expectations, standards, and personal values. And just one last heads up before we dive in, this is a newly edited and restructured version of our earlier recap, now presented in 4K and at 60 FPS. This entire recap series also includes coverage of Outbreak, Outbreak File Number 2, Umbrella Chronicles, and Darkside Chronicles, and these are entries that we didn't include the first time around. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to get started. The setting. Resident Evil Village is set in the year 2021. A few years have passed since the Baker residence incident in Dulvey, Louisiana, and Ethan and Mia are living a fairly ordinary life, or, well, they're trying to at the very least. Together, they have a daughter, a baby named Rose, but the traumatic incident of the Baker residence have understandably left their scars on both Ethan and Mia. Meanwhile, for their own protection, the Winters family have been living in witness protection for the last 3 years under the ever-watchful eye of the BSAA, from whom he has also received some military training, in a remote house in Eastern Europe, which means they're basically entirely cut off and isolated from the outside world. That isolation, in fact, is doubly important because the Baker incident never became public, with the story that the larger world believes being a tragic gas leak and explosion. As Resident Evil Village begins, it becomes clear that Ethan and Mia's attempt at a peaceful life is not going well, and events spiral out of control with shocking speed. One evening, what should have been a quiet dinner is violently interrupted by a squad of armed operatives. They are members of the BSAA's Hound Wolf Squad, led by Chris Redfield, the same man who once rescued Ethan and Mia from the Baker incident in 2017. This time, however, his role is far more unsettling. In front of Ethan's eyes, Chris shoots and kills Mia. Ethan is swiftly overpowered and taken captive, and baby Rose is taken as well. The nightmare only deepens from there. When Ethan regains consciousness, he finds himself inside the overturned transport truck. The convoy has been attacked. Bodies of BSAA soldiers lie scattered around. Chris is nowhere to be found, and Rose is missing. Driven by fear and desperation, Ethan presses forward into the dark in search of his daughter. He soon arrives at a remote village, buried in snow and surrounded by towering mountains. It quickly becomes apparent that navigating this place and locating Rose would be anything but simple. The settlement appears largely abandoned, and terrifying wolf-like creatures known as lycans roam the area. Ethan is forced into brutal and frantic battles just to survive. Eventually he encounters a small group of remaining villagers who have managed to stay alive. Although their survival proves short-lived, Ethan is able to gather crucial information about the village and his situation before they meet their grim fates. The Four Lords. Ethan learns that a woman known as Miranda rules over the village, and she does so through 4 different lords who oversee different parts of the village for her. The 4 lords are Alcina Dimitrescu, who rules from the imposing castle that towers over the village, Carl Heisenberg, a mechanical genius who runs a factory on the outskirts, Donna Beneviento, and Salvatore Moreau, who oversees the village's reservoir. And yes, as you would expect from Resident Evil villains, each of the 4 lords also boasts unique powers that they use to maintain control over the village and to do Miranda's bidding. Alcina Dimitrescu is essentially a vampiric figure with immense physical power and eerie, unnatural abilities. Carl Heisenberg can manipulate electromagnetism, and he's also building a force of violent, mechanical creations inside of his factory. Salvatore Moreau is unstable and deeply traumatized, but he can mutate into a gigantic, grotesque creature with a fish-like form. Donna Beneviento, meanwhile, is a haunting presence who uses the unusual flowers growing across her estate to release hallucinogenic substances into the air, trapping her victims in terrifying visions that feel painfully real. Ethan soon discovers that Rose is likely being kept somewhere within Lady Dimitrescu's castle, so he immediately heads there. Before he can reach it, however, he's intercepted by one of the four lords, Karl Heisenberg. Heisenberg demonstrates the sheer force of his powers and knocks Ethan unconscious almost instantly. When Ethan wakes up, he's restrained in a cavern, surrounded by the four lords, Mother Miranda, and a crowd of Lycans, all staring down at him while they argue about what should be done next. Miranda ultimately allows Heisenberg to proceed, turning Ethan's situation into a cruel spectacle. Ethan is forced into a deadly gauntlet filled with lethal traps, punishing hazards, and relentless attacks from Lycans, all designed for their amusement. Even so, Ethan survives the ordeal, catching Heisenberg off guard and manages to escape. With no time to waste, he resumes his journey to the castle. Along the way, he meets the Duke, an eccentric merchant who supplies Ethan with weapons, upgrades, and other essentials throughout his journey. In their first conversation, the Duke confirms that Rose is indeed somewhere inside of the castle, which only strengthens Ethan's resolve as he pushes forward. But, as you may have expected, the castle proves to be another massive hurdle. As he makes his way through the labyrinthine fortress, he's constantly chased by the towering, terrifying Lady Dimitrescu, as well as three younger women with witchy powers that Lady D refers to as her daughters. At one point, Ethan also has one of his hands chopped off by Lady Dimitrescu, just as a mold-infected Mia did in the beginning of RE7, though Ethan is able to reattach it with a simple splash of first aid fluid, and we're going to talk more about that later and how it makes any sort of sense. Ethan eliminates Dimitrescu's daughters one after another, and their deaths push Lady Dimitrescu to abandon caution and hunt him down personally. This is in direct conflict with Miranda's orders, since Dimitrescu has been told to keep Ethan alive for an upcoming ritual. Their conflict culminates in a final showdown that turns into a desperate fight for survival. Dimitrescu reveals a far more horrifying true form, transforming into a towering, dragon-like monster. The odds are overwhelming, but Ethan ultimately brings her down. In the aftermath, she leaves behind a mysterious flask, which Ethan quickly takes before escaping the castle. Outside, he reunites with the Duke, who explains what has happened to Rose and what Ethan must do to save her. Rose, Ethan learns, has been broken down into 4 separate flasks, with each part entrusted to one of the village's ruling lords. Ethan now has one of them, while the remaining 3 are still in the other's possession. The Duke insists that if Ethan can recover all 4, there is still a chance to restore Rose. With that goal in mind, Ethan heads out to collect the remaining flasks. At House Beneviento, he faces a kind of terror that is less about fighting and more about pure psychological torment. Donna Beneviento uses hallucinogenic influence to trap him in horrifying scenarios, including a grotesque, oversized infant that relentlessly pursues him through cramped, dim corridors, as well as sudden attacks from unsettling dolls that seem to move with a life of their own. Ethan endures the ordeal, breaks free of the hallucination's grips, kills Donna Beneviento, and takes the second flask. Next, he travels toward the reservoir to confront Salvatore Moreau. On the way, he crosses paths with Chris Redfield and the Hound Wolf Squad, who are also operating in the village and pursuing Miranda for reasons Ethan still does not fully understand. Ethan demands answers about Mia's death, but Chris refuses to explain and instead orders Ethan to leave. The tense exchange is interrupted when Moreau attacks in his monstrous mutated form. With Chris and his squad out of sight, Ethan resumes the pursuit, eventually facing Moreau in another brutal fight. Ethan kills him and secures the third flask containing a portion of Rose. Which of course means there's only one flask remaining, the one in Heisenberg's possession. Interestingly enough, however, it seems Heisenberg has his own plans in motion that don't necessarily align with those of Miranda, or the other, now dead lords. He contacts Ethan and makes him an offer. He will tell him where the fourth flask is and how to use all 4 to get Rose back if he helps Heisenberg with something in exchange. Now, what is that specifically? Well, we're going to get to that. Courtesy of intel provided by Heisenberg, Ethan heads to an old fort in the village where the fourth flask is being kept. He fights through a wave of lichens and beasts before finally finding the fourth flask. With all 4 of them now in his possession, as per Heisenberg's direction, he heads to his factory for a face-to-face conversation. That conversation, however, does not go well, to no one's surprise. When they meet, Heisenberg tells Ethan that unlike the other lords, he is not so much a willing servant of Miranda's. He resents her for having burdened him with his powers, and he has plans to take her out and rule on his own. And how exactly does he seek to do that? Well, that's where Rose comes in. Heisenberg tells Ethan that he will help revive Rose if Ethan agrees to letting him use the baby and her unique abilities, and more on those in a bit, to destroy Miranda, after which Ethan and Rose will be free to leave and never look back. Obviously, that does not sit right with Ethan. He has no intentions of helping Heisenberg, nor does he want his daughter being used as a weapon, but Heisenberg, as you might imagine, is not a man who reacts well to being told no. Heisenberg throws Ethan deep into the lowest levels of his enormous factory, leaving him with only one option: fight his way upward and escape. The facility is a sprawling maze packed with lethal machinery and hostile metal creatures that patrol its corridors, turning every step into a life or death struggle. Near the end of Ethan's time in the factory, he crosses paths with Chris again, and this time, Chris finally shares key information that he kept to himself for far too long. Ethan has every reason to feel that if Chris had been honest from the start, a great deal of this suffering might have never happened at all. Chris reveals the truth. Chris tells Ethan that Mia is still very much alive and currently in Miranda's captivity. So what the hell was up with him ruthlessly gunning Mia down right in front of Ethan back at the Winters residence? Well, it turns out that wasn't Mia. That was Miranda, who had shapeshifting abilities, among many others, and was successfully able to take Mia captive and swap places with her some time ago, and that without ever raising any suspicion even from Chris. And, well, what was her goal? Well, she wanted Rose. Why does Miranda want Rose so badly? Well, the answer stretches back more than a century. Over 100 years ago, Miranda was simply a woman living in a remote Eastern European village when tragedy struck. Her infant daughter, Eva, died during the Spanish flu pandemic. Overcome with grief and despair, Miranda eventually wandered into a cave with the intention of ending her own life. Instead, she discovered something extraordinary: a vast fungal super colony known as the mold. This was the same parasitic organism tied to the events of Resident Evil 7. At the heart of that underground growth was the megamycete, the central mass from which the mold originated. But the megamycete was more than just a biological anomaly. It retained fragments of the memories and consciousness of those that it came in contact with. Eva, who had been buried in the area, had also been absorbed into it, leaving behind a trace of her existence within the network. Miranda became convinced that the megamycete offered a path to resurrect her daughter. Consumed by that belief, she dedicated her life to studying and harnessing its power. Through her experiments, she gained extraordinary abilities and began attempting to create a suitable vessel for Eva's return. The 4 lords were products of those efforts. Though each possessed formidable powers, none met Miranda's true objective. In her eyes, they were incomplete attempts in a much larger and far more personal mission. At some point, Miranda was also contacted by the organization known as the Connections, with whom she agreed to work on the mold and the megamycete in order to further her own goals. It was through this work, in fact, that Evelyn, the antagonist of Resident Evil 7, was created. It was also revealed at this point in Resident Evil Village that sometime in the 1950s, Miranda also started collaborating with none other than Oswald E. Spencer, the man who co-founded Umbrella Corporation. In fact, it was through his experiences with Miranda and his knowledge of the mold that Spencer would become obsessed with the idea of bioweapons and a new breed of humanity, which, of course, is what led to the creation of Umbrella, the T-Virus, and so much more. Eventually, after years of failed experiments, Miranda realized that she had found the perfect vessel through which she could revive Eva, Rose, who had inherited unique abilities that would make her the prime candidate for Eva's revival. Miranda's goal is to use Rose's remains in the flasks as part of a twisted ritual in conjunction with the megamycete to bring Eva back. And what exactly is it that makes Rose so special? Well, we're going to get to that soon. Taking on Heisenberg. For the moment, Chris and Ethan now finally on the same page have a more urgent threat to handle, and that is Carl Heisenberg. Chris explains that the Hound Wolf squad had planted explosives throughout the factory, intending to destroy the entire complex. The strategy is simple. Chris and his team will finish setting everything in motion, while Ethan uses one of Heisenberg's own armored, tank-like machines to bring him down. After that, Ethan is meant to regroup with Chris so that they can move together against Miranda. Ethan faces Heisenberg outside of the factory in a chaotic, high-impact fight that ends with the final Lord defeated. Before Ethan can reunite with Chris, however, Miranda appears and reminds him just how far beyond human she truly is. She overwhelms him with terrifying ease, drives her hand into his chest, rips out his heart, and leaves him collapsing to the ground, seemingly lifeless. And yet, Ethan's story has never followed normal rules. Across Resident Evil 7 and Village, he survived injuries that should have been instantly fatal, repeatedly losing and reattaching limbs and recovering at an impossible pace. Even now, after something as extreme as having his heart torn out, he does not simply vanish from the story. Now, this is where the game finally explains why. On the edge of death, Ethan experiences a vision shaped by the Megamycete, one that unfolds inside his own mind. Through it, he learns a brutal truth. He's been dead for years. Nearly 4 years earlier, when he entered the Baker house searching for Mia, Jack Baker did more than knock him unconscious during that first encounter. Ethan was killed and then restored through the mold. The same organism has been keeping him functional ever since, granting him unnatural regenerative ability that has carried him through horrors no ordinary person could have survived. Now, crucially, the story also reveals that Rose inherited aspects of those properties as well, which is exactly why Miranda is so desperate to claim her. Ethan's sacrifice. But wait, there's more. After so many years of punishment, his body, which is by this point mostly mold, is crumbling. But though he is at death's door for real this time, Ethan knows that he isn't going to stop until he's saved Rose. He regains consciousness and finds himself in the back of the Duke's cart, who drops him off close to where Miranda is about to hold her final ceremony, which will see her using Rose, whom she's brought back to her infant self, to finally bring Eva back to life. While Chris and the Hound Wolf squad battle Miranda's followers and set an explosive charge on the Megamycete, Ethan confronts Miranda directly. Their final clash is brutal and overwhelming, but Ethan ultimately prevails, bringing Miranda's reign to an end at last. When it's over, he reaches Rose and gathers her into his arms, only for his strength to fade. His knees buckle and his body begins to break apart. Understanding that he is running out of time, Ethan entrusts Rose to Chris and orders him to get out of the village. Ethan stays behind to make sure the charge planted on the Megamycete detonates. Chris and his team evacuate by helicopter, and Mia, now safe, pleads with them to turn back for Ethan. There's no time and no safe way to return. The helicopter lifts off as the explosion goes off, wiping out the Megamycete and consuming the village. Ethan's final choice is clear. He guarantees the blast, giving up on his own life so that his family can live, and bringing his story to a close with a sacrifice that is as definitive as it is heartbreaking, even if the lingering question of what exactly remains of him is left hanging. Back in the chopper, one of Chris's soldiers shows him the body of a BSAA agent, and it's shown that the soldier is very zombie-like in its appearance. The BSAA, it seems, is using BOW soldiers. Chris orders his soldiers to head to the BSAA's headquarters, and he's clearly pissed. And that's where Resident Evil Village's story ends, and where we jump into its DLC, Shadows of Rose, which is set several years later. Rose's Dilemma. The story takes place in 2037 and focuses on a 16-year-old Rose. Living under Chris and the BSAA's watchful eye and constant protection, and having to shoulder the burden of the unique powers she inherited from her father, Rose is an outcast in her world and wants nothing more than to get rid of her powers and live the life that she never could, that of a regular kid. As luck would have it, the chance to do just that is presented to her. Years later, Rose is approached by K9, one of the operatives from the Hound Wolf squad, who tells her that not all of the Megamycete was destroyed in the village incident. A fragment of it survived. Within that lingering fungal network, he explains, exists something called the Purifying Crystal, an object that could permanently remove the strange abilities that she has carried since birth. Longing for a normal life, Rose agrees to enter the consciousness of the Megamycete in search of it. Inside, she's confronted by disturbing and deeply unsettling manifestations shaped by memory and trauma. As she struggles through these warped environments and relentless trials, she receives guidance from an unseen presence that refers to itself only as Michael, a silent ally whose true nature remains unclear. The twist. Eventually, Rose manages to find the purifying crystal, only to learn that things aren't exactly, or at all, what she expected. It turns out bits and pieces of Miranda's consciousness survived the village incident, and that she continued to hold on to her plans to revive her daughter, Eva. It is for that purpose, in fact, that she used Hound Wolf Squad's canine as an illusion to lure Rose into the Megamycete, a trap that she fell into all too easily. Miranda is not the only consciousness lingering within the Megamycete. Ethan too has left behind a trace of himself inside the fungal network. It's eventually revealed that the presence guiding Rose under the name Michael has been her father all along, quietly helping her navigate the hostile landscape within the organism. With Ethan's support, Rose finally comes to terms with the abilities she once viewed as a curse. Rather than erasing them, she chooses acceptance. She destroys the purifying crystal and, alongside the remaining echo of her father, eliminates the last fragments of Miranda for good. After sharing a final moment together, Rose exits the Megamycete, with Ethan's remaining essence fading away. As Shadows of Rose concludes, it's revealed that Rose has joined the BSAA and is now training under Chris to better understand and control her powers. In the closing scene, she visits Ethan's grave before departing in a BSAA vehicle. In the distance, a lone figure approaches, a quiet and ambiguous image that hints at possibilities without offering a clear answer. This is speculated to be Ethan, indicating that he never died, but who really knows? And that's the full story of Resident Evil Village and Shadows of Rose, which together close off the Winters family saga, even though they do leave some doors open for potential future stories. According to the developer, the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem is set to go back to the series' overarching story, which has been out of focus for a long time now. Really, it hasn't been since Resident Evil 6 in 2013 and Revelations 2 in 2015 that we've really focused on the series' main storyline, with Resident Evil 7 and Village both taking a step away. And that's it. That's the full story of the entire Resident Evil saga from start to end. We hope that you enjoyed this effort from us, and we look forward to delivering more Stories So Far videos in the future. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at Gaming Bolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.